The 56-year-long crisis of treasonous and illegitimate GOP presidents is happening again. And it is. Those of you who are longtime listeners to this program know this song. I will summarize it very briefly. Richard Nixon in 1968 committed treason by reaching out to South Vietnam and bribing, essentially, the president of South Vietnam, saying, I will make you rich if you refuse to go along with Lyndon Johnson's efforts to end the war in Vietnam, because Richard Nixon in 68 was running against Vice President Hubert Humphrey. And if the war was ended, Humphrey would have won. And there's no doubt about that. All the polls showed that. But with the war continuing, and by 68, it was insanely unpopular. And LBJ had actually negotiated peace. They were going to meet in Paris that fall and sign the deal. And Nixon blew it up just so that he could beat Hubert Humphrey, which he did. And he was never held to account for it. And we've got the audio tapes of Lyndon Johnson talking, President Johnson at the time, talking with Senate Majority Leader Everett Dirksen saying, or maybe Senate Minority Leader, whichever, saying this is treason. So number one, Nixon. Then after Nixon, of course, we had Jerry Ford. He was an illegitimate president because Nixon was an illegitimate president. And after Jerry Ford, you had Ronald Reagan cut a deal with the Ayatollah and to hold the hostages in Iran, and that deep-sixed or tanked Jimmy Carter's presidential aspirations. That was confirmed by the then president of Iran, Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, in the Christian Science Monitor and other venues. I recapped that. And then George Herbert Walker Bush, when the word was out, when in 1986 they got busted for the October surprise Iran-Contra, for selling those weapons to Iran in exchange for holding the hostages. When they got busted for that, Lawrence Walsh, the prosecutor, the federal prosecutor, the special counsel, had subpoenaed George Herbert Walker Bush's, then President Bush's, diary of that time, which would have shown that he knew this was going on and he was part of it, and he could have gone to prison. And so his Attorney General, Bill Barr, said, oh, well, just pardon all of them, which he did on Christmas Day, or the Christmas Eve, actually, in 1992. And that was the end of that. So, another, that and the Willie Horton ads, another illegitimate president. And then we get, after Reagan, we get George W. Bush, who down in Florida, his brother throws 70,000, between 57,000 and 90,000. The numbers are still in dispute. At least 57,000 people off the voting rolls in Florida. And, as a result of that, in theory, they were, George W. Bush won the election by 537 votes, but there's a huge caveat. First off, in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court stepped in because there was going to be a recount of all of the ballots in Florida in 2000. And this was ordered by the state Supreme Court. And had they recounted all of the ballots, they would have discovered this. I am quoting now from the New York Times, quote, while 35,176 voters wrote in Bush's name after punching the hole for him, 80,775 wrote in Gore's name while punching the hole for Gore. Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris decided that these were spoiled ballots because they were both punched and written upon, and ordered that none of them should be counted. Many were from African-American districts where older and often broken machines were distributed, causing voters to write onto their ballots so their intent would be unambiguous. So George W. Bush lost by 45,600 votes, but those 45,599 votes were not counted by Katherine Harris, right? And then, of course, the Supreme Court stopped the counting of the actual ballots, which would have discovered those 45,000. This was, they discovered them a year later. Scalia, in his Bush v. Gore decision, said, the counting of votes does, in my view, threaten irreparable harm to petitioner George W. Bush and to the country by casting a cloud upon what Bush claims to be the legitimacy of his election. So that was another stolen election, this time with good buddies Clarence Thomas was put on the court by George W. Bush's daddy, George Herbert Walker Bush. Excuse me. And then on top of that, George W. Bush told Mickey Herskowitz before he became before he was even a nominee for president in 2000, that if he became president, he was going to have a war with Iraq that would get him reelected in 2004. And sure enough, he did that, even though Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11, absolutely nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, absolutely nothing to do with, any of those guys. It was just, So Bush lies us into this war. And then you get Trump coming into office with the help of the Russians. You've got his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had worked for the Russians, had taken millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars from the Russians, shoveling inside, campaign polling data off to Russian intelligence in 2016 so that they could micro-target 26 million Americans in 6 swing states to get the Electoral College vote for Donald Trump. And that's how he became president in 2016. And now Trump knows that Russia made him president in 2016 without that help, without the millions of dollars that Putin spent, and the literally over 120 million impressions created by the posts, the social media posts from the from the Internet Research Bureau, the Russian intelligence arm, pretending to be Americans, mostly on Facebook, but also on Twitter. Had it not happened, Trump would never become president, and Trump knows that. And he wants Putin to do it again. And so now Trump is saying to Republicans, don't you dare send any aid to Ukraine, and don't you dare do anything about the southern border crisis, because I owe Putin, and I want to hand him Ukraine so that he'll help me out in this election, and I want to run on the border crisis, and so don't fix it. Wait for me. And Mitch McConnell now, just like he did with Merrick Garland's nomination, that was over 400 days that Mitch McConnell sat on that nomination. People say, well, Ukraine, the election is 11 months away. I mean, he can't hold out that long. Well, he did. He held out that long for the Supreme Court. So now Trump is trying to exacerbate this crisis on our southern border and screw Ukraine in a way that's going to lead to mass casualties and disrupt the international order, all to give Putin what he wants, the same way Nixon used Vietnam, Reagan used Iran, and Bush used Iraq just to win a damn election. We should not allow this to happen anymore. We have been badly treated, shall we say, by 6 Republican presidents, 5 illegitimate Republican presidents now. So call your members of Congress and tell them that, it's time for Congress to pass border security, aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel. Get this done. It looks like it's coming out of the Senate. You've got people like Thom Tillis, who I'm no big fan of, but, the Republican senator from South Carolina, and Mitt Romney, the Republican senator from Utah, just coming right out and saying, this idea of Donald Trump's to kill this legislation just because he thinks it'll help him politically is wrong. It's not good for the nation. It's not good for Ukraine. It's not good for world peace, frankly. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I have grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with the low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others.
These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini.
This is the program.
Hey, happy Thursday. Rabbits, rabbits, rabbits. It is the beginning of a brand new month. It is the beginning of Black History Month. Ron Kenyatta has a great op-ed about that, by the way, if you subscribe to his newsletter over at substack.com. Very thoughtful. And also it's a Celtic holiday, too, a pagan holiday of awakening. I'll tell you about that in the third hour. Also, why can't morbidly rich tech CEOs be sued or arrested? We saw this performance yesterday before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I want to tell you what actually happened and what's really going on and why in just a moment. Also, is the State Department reviewing options for possible recognition of a Palestinian state? Looks like it. This is going to get interesting. And the real story behind the Republican Party's impeachment of DHS Secretary Mayorcas explained. Let me just lay it out for you exactly what these guys in the House are doing, trying to impeach the DHS Secretary at Donald Trump's demand. In the second hour of our program, Phil Ittner is going to drop by with an update on Ukraine. Also, let's review the amicus brief 25 historians filed with SCOTUS about Trump immunity and the 14th Amendment. And why do anti-abortion fanatics want to freak out first graders with graphic videos? We'll get into that in the second hour of the program. In the third hour of our program, David Pepper is going to drop by, the attorney out of Ohio, with an update on the thuggish takeover of the Ohio School Board. Yeah, it's rolling along. Also, Republicans are now saying out loud that they don't want non-Christians in government. When does this stop? Is this Salem all over again? It's a story out of Oregon, actually. It's very, very weird. So, a lot to talk about here. What I want to begin with, though, is what happened yesterday before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It got a lot of coverage. It was, kind of wall to wall on all the television networks. In particular, the moments when the two moments of high theater, when Lindsey Graham said to Mark Zuckerberg, "You've got blood on your hands, buddy," and then when Josh Hawley asked Zuckerberg if he wanted to apologize to the people sitting behind him who had lost their children because of Mark Zuckerberg's product. And Zuckerberg got up and said, I'm sorry that you feel hurt, or words that, it was a non-apology apology. So what the hell's going on here? Well, generally speaking, when you say to a Republican or a conservative, we really need to regulate blank, right? Fill in the industry. We really need to regulate the fossil fuel industry. We really need to regulate hospitals. We really need to regulate doctors. We really need to regulate the food industry. We need to regulate the pesticide industry. Their response, the classic libertarian response, is that's why you have courts. They literally argue that there is no need for the Food and Drug Administration. In fact, Milton Friedman wrote a book about this. There is no need for the Food and Drug Administration. There's no need to even license doctors. It's a chapter in Friedman's book. No need to license doctors because patients can sue if they get hurt. So if you go to the doctor and, he takes out your pancreas instead of your appendix and you die, your family can sue him. And odds are he won't do that again. I mean, that's the whole logic, right? Now, we have kind of a hybrid system. Of course, we have a court system where you can sue companies that harm you. And we also have a regulatory system where we set up agencies to have oversight over technologies or industries that have the potential to harm us. So the FAA looks at airplanes, and are they safe? The FCC looks at radio and television stations. Are they operating, within the bounds of the law? The Food and Drug Administration looks at drugs and foods, et cetera. You get this. So we've got these two ways that if an industry is harming us or our children, we can hold them responsible. Number one, we can sue them. Number two, we can have a regulatory agency that can regulate their behavior. Except for social media. Let me say that again. Except for social media. Back in 1996, Bill Clinton signed a law called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. It had a section in it, a provision in it, it was called Section 230, that basically says you cannot sue social media companies and you cannot regulate them. So for nearly 30 years now, ever since 1996, what is that, 27 years, something like that, these companies have been operating without regulation and with legal immunity. Now, it wasn't always this way. Before 1996, social media companies were considered publishers. They were just like the New York Times or the Washington Post. If you publish something that is wrong, or if you publish an op-ed by somebody that is criminal, that is calling on people to commit crimes, you yourself, your publication can be held to account for it. Same thing here. I mean, there are things that I could do or say on this program that would get me in trouble with the law, or get me or my stations in trouble with the Federal Communications Commission. I don't do those things for good reason. But with regard to social media, there is nothing that they can do that would invoke a regulatory agency. There is nothing they can do, or virtually nothing they can do, that you could sue them for. None of those families sitting behind Mark Zuckerberg could take him to court because he has immunity. And what that immunity has done is made him into, the richest millennial in the world. He owns 1/50th of all the millennial wealth in America, 2%. Now, like I said, it wasn't always this way. Back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, Nigel Peacock and I got on CompuServe. Nigel is, if you subscribe to Hartmann Report or any of my other, we've got a couple, the hunterandfarmersworld.com, wisdomschool.com. If you subscribe to them, sometimes you'll hear from Nigel, right? Because he does all our kind of back office stuff and customer support stuff. And Nigel and I have worked together for, since the late 70s or early 80s. I don't know when we first met, but it was back in that era. And we ran forums on CompuServe, and they paid us well. I mean, they paid us like 20 grand a month to make sure that we ran, I think, 34 forums at our peak. We had the Macintosh forum, the Desktop Publishing forum, the IBM PC forum, the Kennedy Assassination forum, the ADHD forum, the UFO forum. I mean, these were just like Facebook groups, right? And we had about 20 people who worked for us, or with us, and we split up the money that we got from CompuServe with them. And our job was to make sure that if somebody came into one of these forums and posted a commercial message or tried to solicit somebody for sex or tried to sell drugs or whatever, that we busted them, that we got rid of it, that we got it off the board. And we took care of that. It was an important job that we did. And then came the Telecommunications Act in 1996, and CompuServe said to Nigel and me, we're not going to pay you guys anymore. See you later. Because they didn't have to. They no longer could be sued. They no longer had any liability. Now, if today Facebook had to operate the way that CompuServe did prior to 1996, Mark Zuckerberg would still be a billionaire. It would still be a multi-billion-dollar business. He just would have, instead of making a couple $1 billion a year, he might make $1 billion a year or a few $100 million a year, because he would have to spend, a couple $1 billion a year paying people to do what Nigel and I used to do. And he doesn't want to pay that. He doesn't want to do that. And I'm not just picking on Mark Zuckerberg here. This is true across social media. It's true of Elon Musk with X. It's true of the whole bunch of them. So, I wrote a book about this, right? The Hidden History of Big Brother. And Josh Hawley wrote a book about this. And we came to essentially the same conclusion, which is that it is time to eliminate 30. So here's what Section 230 has brought us. This is from an internal Facebook document from October 2019. And it was leaked to the MIT Technology Review. This is how powerful Vladimir Putin has become in the United States. The largest Christian American Facebook page on Facebook, Christian American page on Facebook, 20 times larger than the next largest, reaching 75 million U.S. users monthly, is not run by Americans. It's foreign run. The largest African American page on Facebook, 3 times larger than the next largest, reaching 30 million U.S. users monthly, not run out of the United States. These are, and mostly these are run by Russia. Or at least that's the assumption that many are coming to. I mean, Facebook is not giving us the details. The second largest Native American page on Facebook, reaching 400,000 users a month, again, not run by Americans. The 5th largest women's page on Facebook, reaching 60 million U.S. users monthly. This is, when the 2019 report was written, the top 20 American Christian sites on Facebook, 19 were run by foreign troll farms. 10 of the top 15 African-American sites on Facebook, including the one that sits at number 1, similarly run by foreign, mostly Russian troll farms. I mean, it's just crazy. And this is, the solution to this, frankly, is to say, these guys have liability. If you put a sign out in front of your house that says, big party Friday night, no rules, everybody welcome, and Friday night comes and a bunch of people show up and there's a guy, dealing guns in the backyard, and there's somebody, set up a heroin shooting gallery in the front bedroom, and they're running a prostitution ring out of the kitchen, the police would come and arrest you. Not just the criminals who are there in your house, but you too, right? This is the flip side of the castle doctrine that dates back to the 1200s in British common law, which is that your home is your castle and you are responsible for what happens in it. Unless you're Mark Zuckerberg, unless you're running social media. The solution that I have, and the solution that Josh Hawley has, and the solution that Dick Durbin was talking about yesterday, is put an end to Section 230. Section 230 was put into place explicitly. It was bipartisan, by the way, in 1997. It was put into place, or 1996, explicitly to jumpstart the internet. Well, it did that. And now it's time to say, it's a mature industry. We need to regulate it. We need to put social media under the purview, under the control of the Federal Communications Commission, and we need to eliminate Section 230 so that these companies can be considered publishers, which is what they are, publishing content that we provide to them, just like a newspaper publishes your letter to the editor. And, let's go with this. So, anyhow, that's my rant. And you can find it over at HartmannReport.com. Why is it that we can't sue these morbidly rich social media moguls? We should be able to. I mean, it's just straightforward stuff. On the other hand, they're going to throw millions of dollars in campaign contributions to prevent this from happening.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Of course, you can thank Clarence Thomas and his 5 right-wing buddies on the Supreme Court for that at Citizens United. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Pat in Deer Park, Washington. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom.
Good morning. Pat, you just went silent. You still there?
Here.
Okay, so what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I was calling in regard to the E. Jean Carroll case.
Mm-hmm.
She won $83.3 million, I think it was. And she's been on several talk shows, and she's saying that she wants to do whatever she can with that money to get to Trump the best way she possibly can.
She's
talking about setting up funds for women, which is great and everything. But I thought, $83 million, why not just buy a couple of Supreme Court justices? Or maybe a 6-pack of senators.
Good point. Except that the guy who is buying Supreme Court justices, Leonard Leo, now has $1.5 billion at his disposal. So 83 million is chump change.
No. Okay.
But I think your point is well taken. The hypocrisy and the bizarre nature of the whole thing. I'm with you, Pat. Thank you very much for calling and sharing that. It's nice to hear from you, Desi in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Desi, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I listen to you all the time. I love your show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for calling.
You were talking about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Recently, I just really had an odd experience with them. I've had this page for 7-8 years with 2,000 friends. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, I'm locked out. I can no longer access my own Facebook page. They've changed everything. My passcode. These people are still using my name.
Sounds like you got hacked.
Yeah, my girlfriend, she can't get into hers either. We were just having this discussion about it, and it just all of a sudden we can't get in.
Did you get an email that seemed like it was from Facebook asking you to log into a website to fix something, and you did so and put in your password?
No. I mean, it was just like when 2024 rolled around, we can no longer access our page.
Huh.
I don't know what's going on.
You can see the page, but you can't write to it, right?
No, I can go to my page, but somebody else is controlling it.
Yeah.
It's a couple. It's a white couple. I'm a black guy. There's a white couple controlling my page, and they're using my name.
Oh, that's strange.
Now I got to go back and try to prove who I am in order to get back into my page.
Right, and you have no legal rights because Facebook can't be regulated and can't be sued.
Exactly.
So, have you reached out to Facebook? Have they said anything to you?
Well, yeah, they want me to send them ID, pictured ID and all of this stuff. I have to jump through a whole lot of hoops in order to prove who I am. I just haven't had the energy to do it. But it's crazy.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of that going on, and some of it is people get these emails that seem like they're from Facebook, and then they give up their password when they try to log on to what they think is Facebook. Others are just, if you used a common password, or if you used a password you've used on other sites, there are dark websites that sell, passwords and email addresses together. And so, it's the importance of having two-step authentication turned on, and also, changing your password regularly or keeping it, fairly complex. Desi, I got to run. I'm sorry to hear it. I wish you the best. Good luck. Yeah, good talking to you. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. Welcome back. So the State Department is reviewing possible options for recognition of a Palestinian state. This is, I think, really good news. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, I got this from Axios this morning, asked the State Department to conduct a review and present policy options on possible U.S. and international recognition of a Palestinian state. For decades, we have opposed this. We have always voted with Israel. We have voted against UN resolutions. This is one of the things that they're thinking of doing. is to stop voting with Israel in the UN the Security Council, and recognize a Palestinian state. The Biden administration is also linking possible normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia with the creation of a Palestinian state. This is based on efforts that the Biden administration's been doing for years now, for 2 years. And Saudi officials have said that, the only way that they're going to work out a deal with Israel is if there is a Palestinian state. So there's that. Also, we may start encouraging other countries to recognize Palestine. Even Netanyahu, prior to 2015, often spoke about the desirability of what he referred to as a demilitarized Palestinian state, but nonetheless a Palestinian state. He hasn't talked about that since 2015, though, when his coalition went all crazy and right wing. But Blinken has not yet signed off on any new policies, so we'll see where this goes. Finally, I wanted to talk to you about this phony baloney impeachment that the Republicans are running in the House of Representatives against Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. It's based on two things. One is that he is refusing to comply with the law. The Republicans are saying that the law requires that 100% of all immigrants who are captured at the border be detained rather than released into the United States. Now, to do this would require 12 times the size, would require prison facilities 12 times larger than all the federal prisons in America, including all the immigration prisons. In other words, it's an unfunded mandate, right? The Congress is not providing the money for this. They're just saying, you have to do it. Oh, you didn't do it, we're going to impeach you. That's number one. And number two is they're saying he lied to Congress when he said that the border is secure. The fact of the matter is that according to Speaker Johnson, the word secure means that there are 0 illegal crossings. The border is, by and large, mostly secure. There are a couple of places where people are getting through, and those kind of choke points. And the Biden administration wants to do something about that, but the Republicans will not give them the money or the resources because they think that it'll help Joe Biden in the election. Amazing. But that's what's going on. That's what they're impeaching Mayorkas for.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. It's Talk Media for the sane among us. We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Age of Illusions, How America Squandered Its Cold War Victory by Andrew Bacevich. This is from the introduction. Without the Cold War, what's the point of being an American? Henry Rabbit Angstrom, novelist John Updike's late 20th century everyman, posed that question just as the long twilight struggle was winding down. More than a quarter of a century later, Rabbit's plaintive query still awaits a definitive answer. Indeed, the passage of time has only sown confusion about whether there is a point to being an American. Even as the Cold War was ending, Updike's surrogate was not alone in feeling at a loss. By the 1980s, the Cold War had become more than a mere situation or circumstance. It was a state of mind. As had Rabbit, most Americans had come to take its existence for granted. Like the polar ice cap or baseball's status as the national pastime, it had acquired an appearance of permanence, so its passing caught Rabbit's fellow citizens unawares. Those charged with managing the Cold War were, if anything, even more surprised. The enterprise to which they had devoted their professional lives had suddenly vanished. Here was a contingency that the sprawling U.S. national security apparatus, itself a product of the anti-communist crusade, had failed to anticipate. At one level, of course, the surprise could not have been more gratifying. In the epic competition against pitting West against East, the God-fearing against the godless, and democracy against totalitarianism, our side had won. All-out nuclear war had been averted. The cause of freedom, which Americans felt certain they themselves embodied, had prevailed. Victory was decisive, sweeping, and unequivocal. In another sense, however, the passing of the Cold War could not have been more disorienting. In 1987, a senior advisor to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev had warned, "We are going to do a terrible thing to you. We are going to deprive you of an enemy." As the Soviet Union passed out of existence, Americans were left not just without that enemy, but without even a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. However imperfectly, the Cold War had, for several decades, offered a semblance of order and coherence. The collapse of communism shattered that framework. Where there had been purposefulness and predictability, now there was neither. Winning the Cold War brought Americans face to face with a predicament comparable to that confronting the lucky fellow who wins the Mega Millions lottery. Hidden within an apparent windfall is the potential for monumental disaster. Putting that windfall to good use while avoiding the pitfalls inherent in suddenly acquiring riches calls for prudence and self-awareness. Not easily demonstrated when the big house, luxury car, and vacation condo you've always wanted are yours for the asking. Similarly, the end of the Cold War might have given Americans pause, especially since the issues at hand were of considerably greater significance than homes, cars, and condos. At least in theory, the moment might have invited reflection on some first-order questions. What is the meaning of freedom? What does freedom allow? What obligations does it impose? Whom or what does it exclude? Of course, Americans had been wrestling with such questions since well before 1776, their answers evolving over time. During the several decades of the Cold War, however, the exigencies of the East-West rivalry had offered a reason to throttle down impulses to explore America's furthermost boundaries, or freedom's furthermost boundaries. Except on the fringes of American politics, most citizens accepted the word from Washington that their way of life was under grave threat. In the pecking order of national priorities, addressing that threat, defending freedom rather than enlarging it, tended to take precedence over other considerations. This is not to suggest that Cold War Americans were a complicated lot. They were not. From the 1950s, misleadingly enshrined as a decade of conformity, through the Reagan-dominated 1980s, domestic crises and controversies were constants. Among the issues energizing or enraging Americans were civil liberties, the nuclear arms race, mismanaged wars of dubious provenance, challenges to artistic tradition, left-wing and right-wing radicalism, crass materialism that coexisted with widespread poverty, and a host of simmering issues connected to race, sex, and gender. Yet through it all, an uncommon outlook centered on resistance to the red threat endured. For most citizens, most of the time, the Cold War itself was sufficient to explain the point of being an American. The collapse of the Soviet Empire between 1989 and 1991 robbed that outlook of its last vestiges of authority. Rarely, if ever, had the transition from one historical period to another occurred quite so abruptly, with such a precise set of demarcations, and with such profound implications. As if in an instant, the discipline that the Cold War had imposed vanished. The absurdity of defining reality as an either-or choice, red or dead, slave or free, good versus evil, now became blazingly apparent. The impact on American ambitions and expectations was akin to removing the governor from an internal combustion engine. Suddenly the throttle opened up. The future appeared equally promising, offering Americans a seemingly endless array of choices, while confronting them with few evident constraints. Everything seemed possible. Confident that an era of unprecedented U.S. economic, military, and cultural ascendancy now beckoned, members of an intoxicated elite threw caution to the winds. The book, The Age of Illusion, by Andrew Bacevich.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. I'm back. I hope we're live. My apologies. I don't know. Did Mercury go retrograde today or something? My monitor here in the studio, I use Hulu to watch the network news. That crashed this morning. But our streaming computer that sends out the audio signal to our nonprofit stations apparently crashed. and maybe the for-profit one too. I don't know. And apparently Westwood One wasn't sending our signal out at the very beginning of the show either. It's like everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Apparently the crashes here were because of a Windows update. Thank you, Microsoft. But anyway, I think we're back on the air. Hopefully all is good. And, you know, just to recap, at the beginning of the hour, I was talking about how Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act makes it so that you can't sue the big social media companies. And didn't always used to be that way. Nigel and I used to be paid very well by CompuServe, for example, to keep their message boards clean. But now they don't have to pay anybody to do that, and so, you know, it's the Wild West. It's turned into a mess. Also, the State Department is reviewing options for possible recognition of a Palestinian state. And the real story behind the impeachment of Mayorcas is just absolutely bizarre. The Republicans are saying that they're going to impeach him because he's not putting enough immigrants in jail. Well, it turns out we don't have enough jail cells. If you know, literally, they want 100% of everybody who comes across the border to be immediately detained forever. That would require 12 times the number of prison beds that we have right now in the federal prison system. And secondly, they're saying that if even one person in 1 year makes it across the border illegally, that means that Mayorkas lied to Congress when he said that by and large the border is secure, and they want to impeach him for lying to Congress. I mean, this is how grasping at straws these guys are, and how weird it all is. It's really a tragedy. All right, let's pick up your phone calls here. Dan in Marquette, Michigan. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
I wanted to talk about the disconnect between how well the economy is doing under Biden and the public perception of it. The general public perception seems to be that the economy is not doing well. And there's a number of factors in that, but a big part of it is simply that they're constantly being told that the economy is not doing well by the MAGA crowd.
Correct.
The MAGA crowd refuses to believe that it's even possible that the economy is doing well because Trump's not in office. But there's something a little more insidious that makes it into even your station, and that's the commercials. At the beginning of your program, there was a commercial for Car Shield, and one of the lines is there is, due to the recent decline in the economy, we've made this blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we don't run that ad from here, by the way. That's an ad that comes out. You're listening to Sirius XM. They put that ad in, but you know, I get it, and this is a meme that, and it's probably an ad that got sold for the right wing. You know, there's several right wing stations for every left wing station. There's multiple right wing stations. It's true on XM as well. So, you know, it's probably that. But I get it, Dan, and I you know, share your concern. I do think, though, that Americans are starting to realize it, and I think the media narrative has shifted, particularly since, you know, Powell's speech yesterday. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful, but I get it. I get it. There is a disconnect. Thanks for the call, Dan. Larry in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
What's on my mind is apparent censorship of international news. For years, I've been watching Channel 279 on my dish service, which is CGTN. It's a Chinese network that gives an awful lot of very good international news, the best source of international news on television.
I'm familiar with it. The woman who used to produce my TV show went to work for them, and I've been there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
did they get taken off?
Pardon?
I mean, it's pretty much a propaganda channel for what it's worth.
In a strange timing, they took it off the air.
Yeah.
They've been heavily criticizing the United States off and on, you know, throughout their tenure. But just lately, they've been showing some very, very gruesome pictures of the devastation in Gaza and interviewing human rights people from all over the world.
Right.
I told my wife when I saw this, I said, we're going to lose this channel. Sure enough, yesterday I'm watching this channel, and in the middle of a program, a sign came on, this channel is no longer available.
Wow.
Whatever happened to free speech, I don't know.
Well, free speech is, you know, the First Amendment prevents the government from censoring anything. It doesn't prevent Dish or Direct or or any other provider from censoring or doing, or just making business decisions. I mean, they may have just concluded, those channels are valuable. They might have just concluded that there wasn't enough viewership.
There's a lot of viewers. I called Dish, and they said they're flooded with calls of people like myself that watch that for international news.
Interesting.
And the officers of the company, I talked to the tech people, the officers of the company are involved. So, no, this was
a decision that came down
They caved into pressure. I knew they would. I told my wife. I predicted it.
Yeah, and it came down from
there's no explanation available to me, and I asked them to call me back, and they flatly refused to do that. So anyway, I just thought I'd pass that. And this is going on all over the country, not just a channel here and there, but people are losing their jobs, Tom, who disagree with.
Well, in the news industry, people are losing their jobs left and right because of the financialization of news, because, half of the local newspapers in America are owned by hedge funds out of New York.
Right?
I beg your pardon?
Has nothing to do with being critical of Israel, right?
I have no, I have no idea. I do know that.
Me neither, Tom.
Yeah.
I'm a good progressive. You ought to join us.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Larry. Mike in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Here, man. You and James on like the last hour on Tuesday were talking about how you agree with the draft. And I do not.
Okay.
I went to school about 10 miles down the road from Fort Riley. And those guys would come back from Nam with their combat pay and were like buying really nice muscle cars. And you would see, and this is more than I saw this several times, ETS 21 days. And then, I think they probably use like tempera paint or something on the back window. 20 days, 19 days, and then they disappeared. You're going to get unmotivated people. And I don't think people are going to be real happy about, getting shot out for $20,000 a year.
I agree, Mike, and that's why we need a draft. The countries that don't have drafts have all-volunteer armies, and all-volunteer armies tend to be quite gung-ho. And you want soldiers saying, and this is what happened with Vietnam. I mean, one of the things that forced Lyndon Johnson to sue the Vietnamese for peace, even though Nixon blew it up, but one of the things that forced him to do it was you had all these fragging incidents. You had soldiers refusing to go. You had people were seriously pissed off. That's a good thing.
Right. Well, I was going to mention fragging. They just had.
I don't mean fragging is a good thing, but what I mean is that when you have a country that has a draft and you have an unpopular war, you're going to get a hell of a lot of blowback. If you have a country that has an all-volunteer army and you have a BS unpopular war like the invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan, then everybody's gung-ho. There is no internal. You don't have the average American in the military. And my argument, and I think that the greatest generation, my father's generation, and frankly mine, people who confronted Vietnam, prove that. That when you have average people in the military, it improves the military, but it also forces politicians to reckon with popular opinion around decisions of war and peace.
Right. So okay, maybe I'm misunderstanding you. You are in favor of a draft.
That's correct.
Or not? That's where I don't agree with you.
Yeah, no, I got that. That's where we started.
Because you will not get motivated people. They're going to be angry that you're.
That's what I want.
Them off of the farm.
I do not. I don't want a bunch of gung-ho warriors to make up 100% of our military. I want there to be skeptics. I want there to be poets. I want there to be philosophers. I want there to be musicians. I want there to be people who are questioning what's going on. I realize that in military culture there are limits to how much you can question, but I think it's really important that you have a diverse military, not just racially or culturally diverse, but politically diverse. And when you have an all-volunteer army, you tend to have a bunch of gung-ho right-wingers in the military. And somebody says go shoot somebody, they're like, okay, we're on our way. Whereas when you've got a draft, when you've got a military that's made up of conscripts, you've got people who are going to decide for themselves whether this is a legitimate war. And in Vietnam, you had, an awful lot of the opposition to the Vietnam War was driven by people like John Kerry, who had been to Vietnam. On the other hand, with World War II, a lot of the support for World War II came from families who had people serving in World War II. Because World War II was, arguably what you call a just war, and Vietnam was arguably what you call BS.
Absolutely.
So therefore, you want a draft. A draft is going to give you that flywheel. It's going to give you that regulator. It's going to give you people in the military who are questioning, what's going on. Mike, I got to run, but we both made our points.
I disagree with you now until hell breaks.
That's quite all right, Mike. That's your prerogative. Thanks a lot for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Picking up your calls here. I'll be right back with you in just a moment. And welcome back. Randy in Des Moines. Wait a minute. Des Moines, Seattle? That can't be. Where are you, Randy?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Two topics real quick.
Hang on just a second, Randy. Where are you calling from so I can fix this thing? I've got...
Oh, no, I'm calling you from Seattle.
Okay, from Seattle. Okay, cool. So what's up? Go ahead.
Sunshine and everything. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Are you aware of Robert Reich's columns?
Oh, yeah, I get it in email every day that he sends one out.
So do I. And I've been reading him, and it seems like every topic it's been more terrifying. The one today was just really unnerving. The one about the scenario is what happens if in the wake of elections, the House's election-denying Republicans find that they can retain the majority in the Congress, and then on January 6th, they refuse to certify as president any electoral results from the states that went for Biden. Presto, the decision about who's to be the next president is made state by state. That's pretty
under the 12th Amendment
to me. And I thought, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. And my second really quick topic is, for those of you on NPR and those of you that work for the New York Times and the Washington Post and the liberal papers, everybody must be pretty scared that if Trump gets elected on day 2, you might not have a job.
Yeah, well, Trump has said that he's going to go after the media. With regard to the House certification of the 2024 election, it's pretty straightforward. If there is not a certification of the election, then the election of the Electoral College, then the election has a fallback. The Constitution has a fallback. It's in the 12th Amendment. And it's that the House of Representatives votes, each state has one vote, and that vote is determined by the congressional delegation. There are 26 states that have have Republican majority congressional delegations, 23 states that have Democratic majority congressional delegations. And so you would have, and then one state that's 50-50. And so you would have basically a 26 to 23 vote in the House of Representatives that would give the presidency to Donald Trump. And Elise Stefanik has signed on this, who's the number 2 or number 3 Republican in the House.
Right.
She has essentially said this is something that's good with us, and it's very concerning. I agree with you. I agree with Robert Reich, and there's the only way that you could fix this right now over the short term would be to amend the Constitution, and that ain't going to happen between now and the election.
That ain't going to happen. Yeah.
So the problem, as Reich pointed out, is that the Constitution was written on the assumption that people would behave in good faith, that politicians would be honest, and that was an assumption that held for 240 some odd years. But Donald Trump came along
up until 2016. Yeah, and we're finding a lot of Achilles heels in this Constitution because nobody's ever pushed the buttons or crossed the line like you know who.
Yeah, and not just Trump, by the way. You've got an entire billionaire-run and funded ecosystem.
His whole cadre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to know if you were as pretty unnerved about.
Whoop! I'm sorry about that. Rob, I just dumped you by accident. But yes, that I am unnerved by that, and I don't know what we can do about it other than, as Robert Reich did, point it out to people so that we're ready for it. but it's going to be wild the next 12 months. I mean, or 11 months, I guess now. So, I'm saying through January because that's when everybody gets sworn into office. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stay with us. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. It is 51 minutes past the hour, and picking up your calls here, Michael in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. As to the draft, I am a retired musician, Army musician, Desert Storm veteran. Mm-hmm. So there. Totally agree with the draft.
Oh, thank you.
Yesterday, besides the Facebook, internet congressional hearing, there was also a hearing about cybersecurity.
I missed that one.
That was,
tell me about it.
In fact, Phil Ittner with Hal Sparks yesterday claims that he has a reliable source that told him Russia and China are already inside our utilities and government agencies.
Oh, we've known that for years. There's 2 chapters in my book, The Hidden History of Big Brother, about that.
Okay. As to Facebook and all of that, you are also a proponent of instead of .com, how about .xxx?
I am. Yeah, I think there should be a separate domain, and that you should only be able to access it if you can validate your age with basically, I think probably a credit card is the easiest way to do it.
Exactly. Also, .pg for all social media.
Oh, that would be an interesting one.
Yeah, there is a system that I use, idme.com, that I use to access my VA records. So there is something like that. Yeah. Now, how to pay for all of that, you also propose reinstating the STET tax.
Yes.
Securities exchange, 1% to 5%.
It's a securities transaction exchange tax, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How about we reinstate it as an e-state tax to pay for all the regulatory, the cybersecurity, anything that has to do with the internet.
Well, now, for people who don't know what we're talking about, Michael, here, the way the STET tax worked, and it went into effect in 1935 when Franklin Roosevelt created the Securities and Exchange Commission and made Joe Kennedy its first head. and it was to fund the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And it was as I recall, a 1/10%, a 1 mil tax on every stock transaction. And by the 1960s, I think it was 1964, but fact check me on that, it might have been 65. But by the 1960s, that STET tax was producing so much revenue, it was way in excess of what it cost to run the Securities and Exchange Commission. So they basically just did away with it. And this as a result of some lobbying, some serious lobbying from Wall Street. And I'm saying we need to bring it back because, number one, it would slow down program trading. It would throw some sand into the gears. It would make the market less volatile. And it would produce a lot of revenue.
Until AI gets involved with trading stocks.
Oh, it's already, and they're already doing it. In fact, you can right now you can buy AI products that will trade stocks for you.
Exactly. So yes, bring back the STET tax. Use it to fund all regulatory agencies. Anything that the government does over the internet, the IRS, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the VA.
Yeah. My argument for the STET tax isn't to get the revenue, although that's an important and good thing. My argument for reviving the STET tax is to make the stock, is to stabilize the stock market, basically, to discourage the kind of high frequency, high speed trading that it can only be done by a small handful of not necessarily right wing, but a small handful of billionaires in New York that can afford to buy office space close enough to the stock exchange computers that they can get, speed of light transfer of data.
They're trading a nanosecond early.
That's exactly right. And this is an advantage they have purely because of their money and their proximity to Wall Street. It's an unfair advantage, and it's distorting the market, and it increases market volatility. It makes it more likely for there to be, sudden crashes and sudden swings in the market. Yeah. And the STET tax, like I said, the phrase that was used back in the 60s as a complaint about the STET tax was that it threw sand in the gears. And that's exactly what I think we need. We need some sand in the gears. Michael, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. Good talking to you. We'll be right back. It's the top of the hour. Phil Ittner is going to drop by with an update about Ukraine with us on the other side of this break. And then we're going to get into the 25 historians and what they have to say about whether Donald Trump should be allowed to run for office. And also, why do the anti-abortion fanatics want to freak out first graders with graphic videos? Really? Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1 hour show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3 hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question: what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Vilma Espin. In Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, health care, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our buddy Phil Ittner in Kyiv, Ukraine. He's the veteran war correspondent whose video blog you can find over on YouTube. Just plug in his name, Philip Ittner, Philippittner. Ittner Philip is his Twitter handle. And Phil, welcome back to the program. How's everything going in Ukraine right now?
A couple of rays of hope and good news. Most notably, the European Union has circumvented Viktor Orban and his obstructionist attempts at stopping funding and have approved $55 billion worth of aid to Ukraine. This is a substantial amount of money. So that is good news. And it's also good news that they've put Orban, they've sidelined Orban. I mean, we've talked about this. I mean, they took him they took him to task, and they said, if you continue to obstruct, we will, we will take action, whether it's, limiting Hungary's vote in the European Parliament, or whether or not we're going to, take economic action against you. Whatever it was, Viktor Orban, he stood down, and so we're getting a lot of money. And that's good news.
Last time
I only hope America will do it too.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I agree. Last time Orban, the last vote, which was a couple of weeks ago, Orban just left the room so that they could get on with the vote without Hungary saying no. What happened this time? What are the details?
Well, again, whatever it was that they told him they would do, and I think it was the bill that is currently, to my knowledge, still in the subcommittee of the Parliament about censuring Hungary and removing their vote within the Parliament because of Orban's obstructionism.
So Orban voted for the aid rather than
the aid is coming. Yep,
Wow.
They have gotten around him, and the bill is passed, or the payment, the decision to send 50 billion euros, basically $55 billion is passed, and that's great news. And then the other thing that's happened just today is that the Ukrainian military announced that they've sunk another Black Sea Fleet ship using sea-based drones, which costs $100,000, $200,000. They have ended up sinking a Russian Black Sea frigate, a missile frigate, worth somewhere between $50 to $70 million. So that's a pretty good trade-off.
Right, and one that was presumably throwing missiles at Ukraine too.
That's right. I have no doubt that there's a very good chance that I myself have been shot at by that frigate. So you won't see me, regretting the sinking and the loss of life. Russian sailors were apparently lost in this, and loss of human life is a tragedy in war. But these guys were shooting at us, and they were killing civilians. So you'll forgive me if my compassion for those soldiers is low. And it also just is, it's a morale boost for the Ukrainian people to see that, I mean, this country doesn't even have a navy, and they have bottlenecked the Black Sea Fleet in the eastern side of the sea, and has obstructed them, the Black Sea Fleet, from implementing a blockade for Ukrainian food and grain to be shipped to the world, through the world market. So without a navy, Ukraine is consistently beating the Black Sea Fleet. So we got those two good things. We're still very concerned about America and the problems internally with America, and we've talked about that in the past. And then there are some internal problems here in Ukraine. There seems to be growing tension between the head of the armed forces, General Zaluzhny, and President Zelensky. And it looks like, we don't have an official statement yet, but it looks like the head of the armed forces, General Zaluzhny, might be about to be replaced, that the president is going to replace him. I had lunch and coffee with a public affairs officer, and he gave me a little bit of insight into why that might be happening. It comes down to his Crimea. And that Zaluzhny wants to mobilize a lot, tens of thousands of more Ukrainian men to fight, because taking back the peninsula is going to be very costly. And he also wants to alleviate some of the soldiers that have been on the front line for a very long time and need some respite. Zelensky is reluctant to implement another mobilization, and yet at the same time, he's pushing for the armed forces to be more aggressive in trying to take back the peninsula. So it really, from what we're learning, again, and this is from a public affairs officer, it's this tension. It's over how to proceed with taking back the peninsula, and it's about mobilization. So unfortunately, it looks like that split is repaired. Zelensky has been an amazing general.
Yeah.
But Zelensky is the president of this democratic country, and as commander-in-chief, much like in our country, it is well within his purview to dismiss a general with whom he has fundamental differences.
Right, the buck stops with him.
That's right. I mean, and there are many good Ukrainian generals who can replace him, but Zelensky has been a real asset.
Yeah, no doubt. So
one of those things.
One of the stories that's being reported here in the United States by Forbes magazine, of all places, is that Joe Biden has figured out a way around the Republican blockade of aid to Ukraine. There is a law that allows our government to dispose of, essentially, surplus military equipment. And we are apparently putting huge quantities of stuff, ammunition and whatnot, on boats to Greece, and on the assumption that Greece will then ship that stuff to Ukraine. That, because we have the authority to give it to Greece, and then Greece can do whatever they want with it. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the surplus that we have, that is absolutely 100% right. I mean, we're not giving. We have, with a couple of exceptions, we have not been giving our most advanced technological weapon systems to Ukraine for a variety of reasons. One, because we potentially want to keep that for ourselves. Also because we don't want them falling into Russian hands. But as you pointed out, we have a surplus of Bradley fighting vehicles, which have been exceptionally successful on the front lines here. We have missile systems that go into multiple launch rocket systems that are, this is 80s technology. This is Cold War technology. And we have massive stockpiles of these things. So we're going to be sending those. And as you say, it does look like it's going to be routed through Greece. But it is 100% within President Biden's purview to do this. Again, one of these things where, as commander-in-chief, he can make those decisions. That'll be a big, boon to Ukraine. But there's also just, as much as that's great, and we're happy to see President Biden doing that. it's still disheartening that there's this obstructionist movement within the United States when it comes to Ukrainian aid, and it's out of the GOP. And as we see the Europeans dealing with Viktor Orban as an obstructionist, why aren't we dealing with our obstructionists? I could name names, but we all know who these characters are. Right. It'll be good to get the stuff that Biden can get around the obstructionists, but there's also kind of an anxiety here that not only is it about the material, but it's about the support. And many Ukrainians know that the American people support them, but this kind of dithering and this interfering in giving assistance to Ukraine because of domestic issues has many Ukrainians frustrated and anxious.
And
not
many
angry,
Americans
but
too.
anxious.
Many Americans
me too.
Yeah,
me too.
The great Phil Ittner, a veteran war correspondent. You can follow his video blog. It's really worth checking out over on YouTube. Just plug in his name, Philip Ittner. Ittner Philip on Twitter or X or whatever you call it. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always great talking.
A pleasure, Tom.
Always learn something. Thank you. We'll be back. Let's review the amicus brief the 25 historians filed with the Supreme Court right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Or is it amicus? One of these days, I'll figure this out. It's 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Ted in Washington, D.C. Hey, Ted, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I think that rather than the Democrats almost apologizing for President Biden's age, they should embrace it.
Yeah, call him a wise elder.
That there are some professions, especially like cabinet makers and goldsmiths, where if the person has some gray hair on their head, it gives you a bit more confidence that the person knows what they're doing. And because of their years of experience, they're seen as master craftsmen.
Yeah.
And in President Biden's case, having some gray hairs on his head and a whole lot of experience in the craft of governing makes him a master craftsman.
Yeah.
And when someone has truly mastered the craft of governing, they have a special title for you. Historians call folks like that statesmen.
Statesman, exactly. Yeah, the surgeon who did the last surgery on my back was 71 years old. I mean, there's something to be said for at least people who can age gracefully. And Biden certainly seems to be doing that. I mean, he's a little stiff when he walks, but and of course he's challenged by his stutter, but he sure seems sharp as a tack right now. So I'm with you, Ted. I really think that we should start referring to Joe Biden as a wise elder, and we should honor our wise elders. It's one of the things that our society, particularly since the 60s, has been so youth obsessed, and I think it's a misplaced obsession. So yeah, I'm with you, Ted. Thank you. From Ted to Theodore in Rockville, Maryland. Hey, Theodore, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've been playing with AI quite a bit. Just asking it various questions. At any rate, talking about the Communication Decency Act and the controversy with some of the social media sites. My point is that companies like Facebook and Google could be applying their own AI capabilities to filtering or monitoring their output to see if whether or not.
Oh, and I think they're going to get there in the next year or two. But that should not be an excuse to not do anything about people being able to hold them responsible.
No, I agree with that. But I think those companies would be smart to turn around and voluntarily implement those capabilities as quickly as they can. And at the same time, that would elevate the utility of AI for a lot of other applications that are not producing any revenue for them yet. If So I would advocate that they stop simply opposing, and that they find a cost-effective way of using the capabilities that they have to comply with the intention of the CDA.
Yeah, no, I get it, and AI has reached the point where these large language models can pretty much figure out any little game you're trying to play if you're trying to post something that's actually like a call to arms or insurrection or something like that. But you're trying to be sneaky about it. They can get around that. Theodore, excellent point. Thank you very much for calling and making it. It's 20 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. One of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. 1/4 of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. 21 minutes past the hour. So what flagged this for me in a really big way was night before last, Lawrence O'Donnell went off on a lengthy rant about the amicus brief or however you say it. Somebody I'm sure will call and fill me in here. Somebody who's a lawyer, I'm not. It's a friend of the court brief, Amici Curiae. And it is by a group of history professors, serious, hardcore, heavy-duty, award-winning, published, well-known, famous history professors who went back and looked at the history of the 14th Amendment, under which we're trying to keep Donald Trump from serving as president or from running for president. And this is just from the summary of the argument. During the congressional debates, Senator Reverdy Johnson of Maryland, a Democratic opponent of the 14th Amendment, challenged sponsors as to why Section 3 omitted the president. Republican Senator Lot Morrill of Maine, an influential backer of congressional reconstruction of the 14th Amendment, corrected the senator. Morrill replied, quote, "Let me call the senator's attention to the words, or hold any civil office civil or military under the United States." Senator Johnson admitted his error. No other senator questioned whether Section 3 covered the president. So this is one of Trump's arguments before the Supreme Court is, that doesn't cover me. I'm not, yes, I took an oath, but it's not that oath. They go on. Similarly, debates over the Amnesty Act of 1872 demonstrate that decision makers understood that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment barred former Confederate President Jefferson Davis from running for president of the United States, a disqualification that amnesty would remove. Republican Senator James Flanagan of Texas warned that, quote, "Jefferson Davis is living, and if the disabilities of Jefferson Davis are removed, the Democrats in finding candidates for the presidency and vice presidency would go no farther than Jefferson Davis." So Jefferson Davis was that generation's Donald Trump, essentially. And they were all very clear that the 14th Amendment meant Jefferson Davis, the guy who led the Confederacy, can't run for president. They go on, Republican Senator Peter Van Wickle of West Virginia. "This has got to go into our Constitution and to stand to govern future insurrections as well as the present." Jefferson Davis argued that he was already punished through his automatic disqualification to hold public office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which he said, quote, "executes itself. It needs no legislation on the part of Congress to give it effect." The Republican Representative John Bingham of Ohio, he was the co-author, the principal co-author of the 14th Amendment, he said, "Did not the gentleman know that it is written in the Constitution that the president, the vice president, and every other civil officer of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of high crimes and misdemeanors?" In other words, he is an officer. The president is an officer of the United States. So basically, they disintegrate, they take apart Donald Trump's arguments before the Supreme Court. I think this is going to get real interesting. Finally, what's going on with the anti-abortion freaks out there? This is news that I got from Jessica Valenti's newsletter, jessica.substack.com. Jessica's been a guest on this program. She publishes a newsletter called Abortion Every Day. And she says, "Last week I broke news on a new legislative trend. Republicans in multiple states have introduced bills that would force public schools to show young students an anti-abortion propaganda video produced by the extremist group Live Action." She says, "I report on legislation in West Virginia, Kentucky, Iowa, and a law that passed in North Dakota last year. It looks like I missed one. Missouri Republicans are also seeking to force public schools to show the baby Olivia video from Live Action. And like Kentucky's legislation, the bill in Missouri would punish schools that don't want to indoctrinate their students with a video made by one of the most radical anti-abortion groups in the country. House Bill 1576 would allow the state attorney general to sue states that don't adhere to the law. The Missouri legislation would also require the so-called human development video to be shown no later than grade 3. Meanwhile, the Des Moines Register reports that the Iowa bill would require first graders to be shown the video. So let me get this straight. These are the same Republicans who are completely opposed to sex ed of any sort, particularly for first and third graders. I mean, that was their whole hysteria, right? Down in Florida. Remember the original Don't Say Gay law was, only third graders and younger. Now it's, of course, everybody. But, we've got to protect these young kids. But let's show them a video about abortion. Let's show them some babies being pulled into pieces or something like that. I mean, it's just, this is bizarre. And meanwhile, down in Florida, the Florida people, the pro-choice people down in Florida finally got enough signatures for their ballot measure. And in Florida, you have to have 60% of the vote to pass. This is polling at 62%. So Republicans are trying to change the law so that it requires 67% in order to pass a ballot measure in Florida. Where have we seen this before? Oh yeah, Ohio. Didn't work out so well for those in Ohio, but they tried to do it by ballot measure. Down in Florida, they're just trying to do it through the legislature, which will probably work. Bizarre. There's no limit to what these guys will do.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Stay with us.
Today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by Bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849, and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors. Such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American Renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. Welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls. Matt in Downers Grove, Illinois. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was listening earlier, and one of your callers commented on a TV station that they took off the air because he claimed that the brutal imaging they were showing.
That's his assumption. I mean, he doesn't know why they got taken off the air. It was the official Chinese propaganda station, kind of their equivalent of RT.
Oh, okay. But one thing that I noticed, now this goes back to very soon after the attack in Gaza, was that they showed when they were pulling bodies out of the rubble, they were, limbs hanging off, pulling babies out that were crushed. They never showed that in the Ukraine. They would talk about schools getting bombed and apartment buildings, and then the only thing they would ever show was covered bodies.
Yeah.
And that was on PBS News. That's why I watch PBS News every night.
Yeah.
And I was like, and this was, back right after it happened. And I thought, why are they doing that? And then you see everybody get all worked up about the images they see.
Right. Interesting.
So I just wanted to comment on that after.
I don't know if it's still going on. Israel used to have censors. If you were doing news from within Israel, you had to run it by the government before you could publish it outside the country. I don't know if that's still the case. I'm not even sure that was 100% the case in the past.
One thing, the reporters that are over there, a lot of, you keep hearing this is being put out by the Palestinian news group. And, people are videotaping this with their phones and putting it out.
Right, which is hard to control.
I don't know.
That's a whole different thing. Yeah, you're right.
But you know what, it took, in my opinion, it took all the people being, and they never were that upset about Ukraine, in my opinion, but they got them really worked up about Palestine.
Yeah, well, it's happening.
Hamas and Palestine are two different things.
You're absolutely right, and this is a twofer for the white supremacists, by the way, because they get to not only whatever, they get to basically trash Jews. I mean, you've got white supremacists in America who are right there with Hamas and wanting to destroy Israel because they're anti-Semitic. And then, of course, you've got, people who are legitimately concerned about, what looks like something like a genocide that's going on in Gaza, these massively disproportionate number of deaths. So it's a tough one. Matt, thanks for the call. From Matt to Matt in North Creek, New York. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, on the draft, I agree, but I would make sure you set 30 to 50-year-olds first and leave the kids alone.
Okay, I get it. My opinion is that it's a great transition point in life. It's a rite of passage, as it were. And again, I'm not saying that everybody needs to go into the military. In fact, in my vision of this, somewhat like Germany in the 80s when I lived there, is probably more than half of the people who get drafted would end up working in hospitals and volunteer positions or traveling around the world doing good stuff with with things like AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps and stuff like that. There would be lots and lots of opportunities. But your opinion is registered, Matt. Thank you for the call. Mike in Anza, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for your work.
My pleasure.
I'm thinking, well, what I see is a system I call the evil of two lessers. I don't get to vote for my candidate, but the candidate is the problem. A guy says, I'm going to do this and that, and maybe I'll even make America great again. And it doesn't tell us what he means by that. We have wars like Iraq. We went to Iraq, and then in a few months we find out that every reason they gave us was a lie. And we can't say, as a people, all right, let's get out of this war. It was a lie. And there was Vietnam. The reasons they gave us were not the reasons.
So I hear your complaints, Mike. What do you want to do about it? What are you going to do about it?
Oh, well, I'm working on the larger problem about world democracy. I call it tribal world democracy. I think the whole world should get together and vote against nuclear weapons. Have them all ended. No more nuclear weapons. Most people in the world would agree with that.
So what are you doing to make that happen?
I'm working on the pre-act, like the.
So you're writing something.
Declaration of Independence.
Oh, that's good.
And
everybody writing something is a good start. I commend that. Mike, thanks for the call. Mario in Chicago. Hey, Mario, what's on your mind today?
Sir, good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
This morning on CNN, it was this, I think, CIA equivalent to us from Ukraine. They asked him about Trump and Putin. And he, with no hesitation, he says, oh, there's no problem. There's nothing wrong with that. That is not true. This is a Ukrainian general. They're supposed to be the next second in command. Mm-hmm. And what struck me, holy macro, how can he say this? And I was wondering if this gentleman will have an answer for that. But nevertheless, it is problematic to hear that.
So let me get this straight, Mario. A high-up official or intelligence official in Ukraine said that he is not bothered by the fact that Donald Trump is dancing to the tune of Vladimir Putin. Is that the essence of what you're saying?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
He say, and besides, whatever America say about Trump and Putin, that's not true. And we deal with him when if he became president again. We deal with him. We can do it. There's no problem.
Yeah. Well, what do you expect him to say? Oh my God, I'm worried. I'm worried.
No, well, I expect him to say just to not put that thing that is no problem, which is a problem between Putin and Trump, and it's problematic to the whole world.
I think what he's trying to do, Mario, is the last thing that Ukraine needs to do right now is insert itself into domestic American politics, particularly when the Republicans are trying to prevent any more aid from going to Ukraine. One Ukrainian official, in fact, I would argue that probably his being asked that question was a setup. One Ukrainian official trash-talking Donald Trump, that'll be the end of all aid to Ukraine coming out of the United States. So it would be a horrible mistake for him to actually say the truth.
It was very strong to hear that. And then second, very quickly, I see my doctors. I see everyone. Every time that I'm in the bus and the train, which I make an effort to take bus, trains, and walk, I talk to everyone that I can concerning our democracy. And believe me, it is amazing how many people that are not aware of what's going on. And this is young people, older people, and a lot of Trumpanians, a lot of bigots out there.
Yeah, fewer than 20% of Americans pay attention to politics outside of the 3 months before the election.
Yeah. I recommend everyone, take the bus, take the train, walk, and talk to everyone that you can. It's imperative for us to do that.
There you go. That's a great suggestion, Mario, and good on you for doing it. And thank you for calling and sharing that. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Hi, Tom. Nice to talk to you again. On January 30th, PBS showed a program called Frontline, the United States versus Democracy. It was 2.5 hours, and it was about everything that Trump has done before and since the election, and it was awesome. And I don't think the media is going to put it on, but I know that they said at the end Amazon.Prime shows it.
Oh,
I really think people should watch it.
Okay.
It's awesome.
America versus United States versus Democracy, is that the title?
Yes. It's a Frontline program on PBS.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
It was first aired on January 30th.
Yeah, apparently PBS has been doing some pretty damn good programming. Denise, thank you. Thank you for the tip on that. It's in a few seconds, it'll be 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls right here on the Thom Hartmann program, speaking the truths the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stay with us, picking up your calls right after this. And welcome back. Pat in Seattle. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I was listening to, first of all, love your program. And I was listening to a caller a few minutes ago come up with an idea, what's her name? Jean Carroll, her $85 million. And she said she wants to donate it to, quote, something Trump hates. Right. But I had an idea. You have said, off and on in the last year or so, the fact that there's really only one, maybe two, but not very many, progressive radio talk shows. But that there are have been, billionaires and oligarchs from the conservative side have been funding radio talk shows for the conservative point of view in Spanish.
Right.
And that actually that they're, they're brilliant actually in terms of strategy. My thought was, why doesn't somebody, approach her? I don't think it would take $85 million to just maybe start 4 or 5 more progressive talk shows like yours. And, in 2024 sometime, it's a long year. And then I also thought about the fact that, honestly, this is, it could be your legacy because, when you're some point you're going to want to retire and spend time with your family and grandkids, and so you'd be able to say, "Wow, one of the things I did before I had to leave the program was I was able to seed several more progressive talk shows."
Yeah.
And that's my idea.
Well, thanks for the sentiment and the idea, Pat. Odds are, first of all, my goal or my plan is to sit in this chair until I die. But, like Larry King did. I mean, he's kind of my role model. I mean, I think he was pushing 90 when he finally croaked. And he was still on the air. Number one. Number two, I don't think that E. Jean Carroll is ever going to see a penny of that money from Donald Trump. She might get the $5 million from the original judgment. But I'm betting that when the New York judgment comes down, that he's going to just declare bankruptcy. He'll be allowed to keep the assets that he has down in Florida, his home, and that he's probably got $1 billion stashed overseas in bank accounts. I mean, he made $1 billion while he was president. We don't know where that money went. He's raised over $1 billion in the 7-8 years that he's been running for president, and we don't know where a lot of that money has gone. He's got shell companies within shell companies, as front groups. But I'm guessing that he's going to figure out a way not to pay her. In fact,
probably you're very savvy. I mean, one of the things that's so great is that you know how to follow the money trail on a lot of this stuff. Well, then in that case, then let's be thinking of some other oligarchs or billionaires who are on to the left. And
I've been working on that one. I published a piece in The Nation like 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. Just laying out the state of political talk radio right now. 1,500 right-wing stations. A couple of dozen left-wing stations across the country, and our billionaires need to be buying some radio and television stations too. Sadly, they're not, and I have been banging my head against that wall for 21 years now, Pat, 22 years actually, since I wrote in 2001 or 2002, I wrote this piece, Talking Back to Talk Radio. No, I guess it was 2003. Talking Back to Talk Radio that was published in Common Dreams that became the business plan for Air America. I've been right in the middle of it all this time. And I'm telling you, it's not moving very fast. Pat, thank you for the call. It's unfortunate, but right-wing billionaires understand media. Left-wing billionaires seem not to. Don't ask me why, but this is just where it's at. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. It is 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Frank in Miami. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I'm doing well, Tom. Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that this coming Wednesday, February 7th, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., the Florida Supreme Court is going to take up the proposed constitutional amendment regarding reproductive rights. They have to do it by law. In other words, they have a criteria that they have to meet. Number one, the ballot summary cannot be any greater than 75 words. The second is it has to be a single subject. And the third is because our Attorney General here in Florida, Ashley Moody, is fighting it. Our side is having to we'll put in their 2 cents on it. So we won't know for sure until by April 1st. Now, the Florida Supreme Court, every Thursday at 11 a.m., they issue their opinions online, so we'll just have to keep track of it from there. But I also wanted to mention what you said about the 67% threshold that they want to increase the amendment by. The way it works in Florida is that the Florida legislature has to pass it as what they call a joint resolution by 60% in each chamber. And if it meets that criteria, it then goes on the November general election ballot. However, the people have an option there. If you can get 41% to oppose something that you don't like, it won't pass because you need 60% of the registered voters that are voting on that issue to actually pass it. In other words, make it part of the Florida Constitution.
Right, and this legislation, this proposed legislation that's going to be on the ballot, unless the Supreme Court, your state Supreme Court, strikes it down, this proposed legislation is polling right now at 62% in Florida. So right now, at that 60% threshold, it would pass. But like you and I both said, the Republicans in the Florida legislature want to raise that threshold to 67%. That's a decision that's being made by the legislative body, right? Not by the Supreme Court.
Right, that's being made by the legislative body, but they need 60% of the legislators themselves to put it on the ballot.
To approve a constitutional amendment.
Right, and that in itself would be a constitutional amendment. And so anybody that would be opposed to raising the threshold, all you would need to do is to get 41% of those people that are voting on the issue to say no to that. And then it won't pass because you need 60% of the registered voters.
I get that. I get that. Do you think that 60% threshold in the Florida legislature is a barrier to this? I mean, it's controlled by Republicans.
No, because they have super majorities in both chambers. So they have more than 60% in each chamber to pass it if they get to it. That's the question.
Wait a minute. To pass a bill liberalizing abortion rules in Florida, I don't think they're going to be in favor of passing that. What am I missing here?
Oh, no. What I'm saying is that you need 60% of each chamber, in other words, of the members of each chamber to pass it as a joint resolution, which then in turn goes on to the ballot in November.
So that would be a different strategy for getting this on the ballot. Is that what you're saying? Than the signature gathering by individuals. Okay, so the signature gathering by individuals is the one that's going before the Supreme Court, and that's the one that has the greatest chance of passing. The odds of the legislature passing a liberalization of abortion laws in Florida, I would think, is zero, isn't it?
Oh, no, it's not liberalizing it. No, they don't. They're against liberalizing the law because they just enacted last year the 6-month ban.
My point, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not going to come out of the legislature, but it could. If the Supreme Court allows it, it could come out of the ballot measure. I get it. Frank, thank you so much. Thanks for clarifying all that. Appreciate it. Gar in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Gar, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up, Gar?
I just want to talk about the military draft, why it will never come back.
Okay.
I got drafted, and I was MP when I was in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And we had soldiers who would not wear uniforms, who would leave, and the CID had to go after them. Was too busy chasing soldiers down, you know. And we had people that would never wear a uniform.
This was during Vietnam,
rather
right?
go to jail. Yeah, it was during Vietnam.
Yeah.
And that's why it never come back. And it was probably cheaper for them to get rid of the draft and pay more money to soldiers than to go after people.
Oh, it was, what I'm saying, Gar, is that's a good thing that you've got people in the military who are opposed to being in the military. That makes the political class in America, since they have to listen to the voters, and these draftees are coming out of the body of the voters, right, from the people. That makes them more responsive to public opinion.
I agree with you on the draft, but that's why it would never come back. It probably cost too much money. You could never went to Iraq or Afghanistan with a draft.
You're right.
Could never went in there.
You're right. Yeah, I believe you're absolutely right. That had there been a draft,
we had to go after soldiers who tried to hijack planes
to get out of war. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Yeah, I totally get it.
Hey.
All right. Well, Gar, thank you very much for the call and for the insights. So that's a good one. I appreciate it. Pearson in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Pearson, what's up?
Well, I hate to disagree with you, but I'm going to have to.
Feel free.
The question of
it's a talk show.
I know, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness about it, and you're allowing dissenting opinions. So here's the thing. Recall when we were children, like 8, 9 years old, the time span from the day after Halloween to Christmas Day, which is approximately 54 days, that seemed like forever and a day, as opposed to the parents who, that's just a few weeks, they barely have any time to catch their breath to start shopping for presents and wrapping them and hiding them. Then they got to prepare food.
So what does this have to do with the draft, Pearson? Pardon the interruption, but we only have 20 seconds before we hit the end of the hour.
Okay. Vietnam was a draft situation, and I was 8 years old in 1967, and that war, to me, was a direct threat. I felt like cannon fodder. And I do not agree that leaders respond to public pressure. Otherwise, we would not have had that war going on for so long. And in the lead up to 2000 with George Bush and all the people around the world protesting.
Yeah, but there was no draft then in 2000. He had a professional army who was willing to do whatever he said.
Regardless of the army being drafted or voluntary, they still did what they want to do, regardless of what you and I think.
Okay. Pearson, your dissent is noted. Thank you for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls and more of the news of the day right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Ittner has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskenson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy. in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. David Pepper's on the line with us, the lawyer, writer. His latest book is Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American, political activist, former elected official, adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, has served as the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party and regularly writes on Substack, laboratories-of-autocracy.com. And on Twitter, David Pepper. David, that's your Substack newsletter is laboratories-of-autocracy.com, right?
I think it's maybe just David Pepper, but
yeah, because that's what I'm seeing is David Pepper. Substack.com. There we go.
Yeah, that's what I would use.
Okay, so just go to Substack and plug in David Pepper. I just wanted to get that straight. So, because I subscribe to it, in fact, I'm holding a copy of your most recent newsletter here in my hand that I marked up this morning. You write, over the past year, we've seen a case study of this with the takeover of the Ohio School Board, an independent body with numerous members elected directly by voters. So, number one, how did and why did Ohio get an independent school board? And number two, what are the Republicans trying to do about that and why?
So my bigger theory, and I assume you'll agree with this, is that public education is clearly one of the major fronts in their attack on democracy. They don't like public education for many reasons. And Ohioans, to their credit, in the 50s had a constitutional amendment to create some independence in the way our public schools were dealt with because they were concerned about politicians and their donors sort of using schools for their benefit and not the benefit of families and kids. So we've had an independently elected school board for the state. We've had an independent superintendent. And just like so much else in America, last year, we actually elected some public school champions to these positions against the culture war type of, figures that we're all stuck with. So the voters spoke out. They wanted sort of normal public school advocates on the school board. And within weeks of that, our governor, our state house, basically another form of election denialism, passed a law stripping almost all the powers away from the elected school board and bringing it into the governor's bureaucracy. And so if you look back over the last 20 years in Ohio, we've had scandal after scandal as they've given public school dollars away to for-profit online schools. They're now giving it away to these private vouchers that are subsidizing middle-class families who are already going to private schools with public funds. By doing this, they not only get it out of the hands of the voters directly voting for these members, they're putting all of this stuff with a history of really scandal behind closed doors where we can't see it. And so I walked through over the last year just how aggressive they have been in trying to remove the oversight of public schools from the public eye and really from being directly controlled by the voters. It's really disturbing.
It really is. Is this being motivated by ideology? You know, we hate public schools. Which seems a bizarre thing for Republicans to embrace, but I get it. Jefferson famously said, if you want an uneducated populace and a functioning democracy, you want something that never existed and never will. Bad paraphrase, but So is it ideology? They hate public schools? Is it, does this track back to the 1954 Brown decision? Is it because public schools are racially integrated? Or is it just good old-fashioned corruption? The very profitable private schools are shoveling campaign funds and support to Republican politicians, and in exchange for that, they're messing with the law. What's going on here, David?
I think that, so this is basically happening in so many of these red states, and I think the answer is it's because all these things are aligning. Corruption, pay to play. The biggest donor to the Ohio Republican Party for a number of years was a for-profit online school scam that pulled money out of public schools for every student it claimed was taking courses online, and it converted some of those public dollars into contributions to politicians. So there's pay-to-play corruption. By the way, that outfit was taken down by the FBI in the end. It was a massive scam. Corruption, ideology, far-right religious groups, and just the broader effort to undermine public schools because of unions, because of the broader common good approach they bring. So it's all those things come together, and that's why I think what you see, and when those things align, that's when you truly see the right wing go nuts. And right now, there's money to be made from these public dollars. It's like a piggy bank for their donors. There's an ideology they're supporting. And again, I bring up the Ohio example, but all around the country, in 23, we saw an explosion of these universal vouchers, which are, as we can see in the data in states like Arizona, Ohio, are largely now paying for private schools for families who already could afford those private schools. Right. It's not the old narrative, oh, this is helping kids in public schools who can't afford. No, this is actually going to subsidize families who are already going to private schools. So this is a real national crisis right now. It's getting overlooked, I'm afraid, which is why I'm trying to highlight it. And this public school board takeover in Ohio is especially an egregious example of it. It's going to all get behind closed doors. It already is, frankly.
It's an upper middle class subsidy, in fact.
Totally.
So how are the good citizens of Ohio reacting to this? I mean, there have been this series of just outrages, and the most visible, at least nationally, was the one around, trying to raise the threshold for a constitutional amendment for the abortion issue, from 50 to 60%. At what point do the citizens of Ohio look around and go, these people are screwing with us?
What's interesting is this also this cuts against sort of the conservative rhetoric that schools should be determined by the parents and the voters and not put in the bureaucracy. It's the Republicans in Ohio who took the decision away from voters and stuck it into a bureaucracy. So I did a poll on this about 4 months ago. And to your question about what should we do, this issue was toxic. Trump voters hated this idea. Democrats hated this idea. Supporters of the governor hated this idea. This thing was less popular than any idea. It was like 75% disagreed, 15% agreed. Wow. They want to vote directly for their state school board. So my advice, I think this is what happens in these states. They're just hoping it goes away. And the reason I wrote this was to say to everybody, do not let it go away because it's toxic. This is a terrible issue for them. It's worse than an abortion ban, which is already terrible. This is a bad issue for them. It's a third rail. So every state house candidate, every statewide candidate, every sort of community meeting, we need to keep this on the front burner because in the end, I actually think this could be a very big issue going into future statewide elections. It's as you said, it's sort of a combination of people wanting to vote for schools and that issue 1 last year in Ohio that was basically taking their vote away. This is like issue 1 for schools. Right. And there are a few issues left that people really don't want the extremists to take over. And we saw this with all the Moms of Liberty people losing all over the country last November. They don't want extremism in their schools. They want to vote for the most part. And this is sort of an end run at cutting the voters out from school decisions to get a more extreme approach in Ohio, in most places, they do not want that. And I think there's a way to take this and turn it into a very sort of high-profile, high-energy campaign issue for the future.
Now, in 1980, when David Koch was pouring money into the Libertarian Party and basically kind of revived and built the Libertarian Party, he ran for vice president that year on the Libertarian ticket. And one piece of his platform was to break the bond between school and state. He wanted to do away with all compulsory school attendance laws. He wanted to do away with all federal, state, and even local support for, there was taxpayer-based support for education. He wanted to close all the public schools and basically say, you're on your own. Figure out a way to educate your kid. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't, or whatever. That's been a libertarian ideology for a long time. And in 1980, when David Koch ran on that, people thought he was a crackpot. But now you've got, 5 states that have universal vouchers, as I recall? Maybe 3?
And expanding, 23 it exploded. I mean, one of the experts who's against this called 23 the year of the universal voucher.
Exactly.
And by the way, it does go back to what you're saying, though. This is DeVos. This is a lot of them. They really don't want government in schools. They think of it as sort of a market economy. Each person should choose. They would crush public schools. They can't really admit that. So at first it was a voucher for poor kids in public schools, a small sliver. Then they universalized it. So largely it's white middle-class families grabbing at money that they most of all didn't even need to go to schools they were already going to. It's blowing up. And of course, if that money's being given out, and by the way, we have letters that we found and others have found, schools now send letters to parents saying, here's this new opportunity. Be sure to grab it. And some schools have said, you must grab it, or we want to have a meeting with you, or we'll take away your support. And so we're seeing the numbers just explode, going up to $1 billion. Arizona exploding in costs, exploding in numbers. And that all, and by the way, and then on the flip side, this nonstop narrative to run down public schools, right? The indoctrination. So run down the public, big money and subsidy for the private. It is serving that goal that the Kochs and DeVos have, which is in the end to kind of crush the system of public education. So, and I worry that it's still getting lost how bad these universal vouchers really are for systems like Ohio's. By the way, one other thing, we were the 5th highest ranked school system in quality in the nation 15 years ago, Ohio. We're now in the mid-20s. So the result of all this nonsense and the pay to play is a school system that was one of the best is falling rapidly. So there's a real impact on all this stuff on the ultimate quality of the education being provided.
We're talking to David Pepper. David, I had just a little less than a minute here before we hit a hard break I can't control. Is there any kind of a movement in Ohio to push back on this, or in any of the other states that have embraced, statewide vouchers?
Yeah, there are multiple lawsuits right now. One, a lot of public school boards, to their credit, have signed on to a lawsuit saying that this violates a part of our Constitution that says that we have to provide a certain level of common schools, public schools. There's another lawsuit that some parents are bringing against the state school board takeover. In a state like Ohio, these are somewhat uphill battles, but I'm really glad they're bringing them. It also brings attention to it. There are also some really good public advocates, and I cite them often in my Substacks, folks who have been at this for years, who I really admire, who really make sure this doesn't get lost. And in the end, as I said, we're all on the side of about 75% of Ohioans. This is only happening because of gerrymandered districts that they can't sort of lose from, because for the most part, people still like their local public school.
Yeah.
And if they understand that it's being undermined, they will lose an election in a fair district. So we've got to keep it on the front burner. There's some wonderful people who are doing that every single day, still now after years in this fight.
So go over to Substack.com and plug in David Pepper, and subscribe to his newsletter. It's really worth reading. David, thank you so much.
Thanks again. Appreciate the uplift.
My pleasure.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. Now Republicans are saying out loud that they don't want non-Christians in government. Seriously? I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Stay with us. And welcome back. 18 minutes past the hour. And let's see here. Who has been on hold the longest? My apologies, by the way. Bill in Pulaski, Tennessee. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
I've had an idea here in the last week or two that I would like to see every state be required to create 2 more network channels. one for federal election business and one for state and local business. And
you mean sort of like C-SPAN?
Made available, huh?
You mean like C-SPAN kind of things?
Say again, please.
Do you mean like C-SPAN kind of channels? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just like ABC, CBS, regular network channels that anybody can get with an antenna.
Yep.
Or it could be done over the internet as well. And that would be the only place that politicians are allowed to campaign.
Yeah.
And do so cheaply.
Not a bad idea, Bill.
And we set a certain amount of money that they are allowed to receive from each citizen. No more of this.
You know, prior to the 90s, the television stations were required to give free airtime to political candidates to have their debates.
Right. That's kind of what we should have here.
We did away with that with, I believe, the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, but I could be wrong. Bush the elder was the first who refused to do a debate with the League of Women Voters, and that led to them.
The fairness doctrine.
Yeah. Well, it was Reagan who killed the fairness doctrine, but yeah, Bush was vice president. Excellent point, Bill. Thank you very much. Bob in Cardiff, on your mind today. Bob?
Yes.
You're on the air.
Yes. I was listening to you in the car here just half an hour, a little bit more ago, and you were talking about the draft, which, like, I got drafted in '66.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out and heard that, when they did do away with the draft, first I thought that was a great thing. But I agree with you 100%, is that everybody should do a little time, unless they want to re-enlist.
Mm-hmm.
And that way we don't get the guys that are volunteering. They're either poor or they really want to go, quote unquote, like kill ragheads. I mean, I was a Uber driver for a little while in retirement, just because I was bored. And up in Camp Pendleton, just up the hill, the Marine base, these kids, man, the ones that were in there, they all want to go over and fight, and
they want to go kill somebody.
If we had the draft again, which I think you said when I started this call in the car, you said that would stop people wanting to start wars.
Yeah, I think what it does is it makes politicians more responsive to public opinion, because the larger public has a stake in it because their kids are in the military. Right now, only something like 4% of American families have anybody in the military.
Oh yeah, well, and beyond that is just get rid of deferments if they get rid of the draft, so everybody has their fair chance.
Yep, I agree.
I never felt too good that I had to go.
No, I totally get it, Bob. I remember the era well. Bob, thank you. Thanks for the call, and thanks for your vote on the issue. I appreciate it. 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 24 minutes past the hour. And by the way, I've had a number of people text me, email me, tweet me that the caller who was talking about the incredible new Frontline program about Donald Trump gave the wrong name for it. The name of the program, the correct name of the program, and it's over on PBS, and it's also available through the PBS app, and it's apparently also on Amazon or on Prime, is called Democracy on Trial. And I haven't seen it, so I can't vouch for it, but, you know, it sounds good. Meanwhile, here in Oregon, we had a ballot measure on our ballot, I believe it was 2 years ago, Sean, if you don't show up for 10 legislative sessions, you can't run for re-election. Yeah, because the Republicans, you know, the Democrats have a supermajority here in Oregon, so the only way the Republicans could defeat any kind of Democratic legislation was to deny them a quorum, to not show up so that the House or the Senate can't actually convene itself and do business. And they've been doing this. And now the Supreme Court has ruled, no, I'm sorry, you have to comply with the law. We passed this ballot measure, and now there are 10 members of the Oregon legislature, all Republicans, who are not going to be able to run for re-election. The Supreme Court just ruled on this. Meanwhile, an Oregon lawmaker, and I don't know if he's one of the 10. I believe he's not, but he's Warner Rischke from Malin, which is a little town down near the California border, the Oregon-California border. He's a member of the National Association of Christian Lawmakers, and he was on Save the Nation, which is a talk show streamed on Facebook affiliated with the National Association of Christian Lawmakers. And here's what he had to say. This is a verbatim quote. He said, "You go back in history and you look at the men and the struggles that they faced and the faith that they had. Those are the types of people you want in government, making tough decisions at tough times. You don't want a materialist. You don't want an atheist. You don't want a Muslim. You want somebody who understands what truth is and understands the nature of mankind and the nature of government and the nature of God." Well, the Freedom from Religion Foundation reached out and said, don't you think you should apologize for that? And Reschke has told OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting, our NPR, statewide affiliate, that my comments were grossly taken out of context. So OPB said, okay, cool. What was the context? What did we miss here? And this is from a story in the Oregonian. But when asked for more specifics about what he meant to say, Rischke did not respond. Meanwhile, Muslim State Senator Jayzik Jama, a Portland Democrat, told the public radio station that he was disheartened to see one of my legislative colleagues express views contrary to American values, the U.S. Constitution, and our collective aspiration to building a more perfect union. Amen.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Pun intended. So it's a high holy day for the pagans. I'll tell you about that after the break, and I'll pick up your calls. Stay with us.
Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. So welcome back. So one of the Substacks that I subscribe to is Amanda Yates Garcia, which is about basically paganism. I'm guessing Amanda would describe it differently, but anyhow, and witches. And I thought this was fascinating. Today is a high holy day for the pagans. It's Imbolc, I-M-B-O-L-C. February 1st is the eve of Imbolc, so that starts tonight, I guess. And Kalish the crone drinks from the well of youth and becomes Brigit, B-R-I-G-I-T, which is pronounced breed. Imbolc is the pagan holiday of awakening. For the ancient Gaels, Imbolc marked the first day of spring and is known as the holiday of Brigit, the Celtic triple goddess. As the pagan world, she writes, was converted to Christianity, the goddess Brigit became a holy woman, a saint. And if you have a fireplace on Imbolc Eve, you rake the ashes flat and smooth, and then you leave a dish of offerings for Our Lady of Perpetual Fire, which is what she has now been turned into now that she's a Catholic saint. If the next morning you get up and see the mark of a wand in the ashes, it means you have Brigit's favor. If you find a footprint in the ash, be joyful, because it means that Brigit was with you during the night and that she will bless you this coming year. And if there were no marks on the ash, you may have offended the goddess. Burn offerings of incense and bury an egg where 3 streams or 3 roads come together. Interesting. Ancient wisdom from the pagans. I love it. All right, let's pick up your calls here. David in Clearwater, Florida. Hey, David, thanks for listening to WMNF. What's up?
Just something about the judgments, money judgments that have been entered, and I assume are being appealed by former President Trump.
You're talking about the E. Jean Carroll $89 million now?
Right.
What about
it? There's a rule of court in Florida that, and I think that New York is the same way. I don't know what the amounts are, but in order to continue, or in order to stop her from selling his assets to satisfy those judgments, that is to say, have a stay entered when the appeal is filed, it's the job of the losing party to post a supersedious bond. And that bond can be posted in cash, or you can go to a bonding company.
Right. He put up $5 million for the first fine. So far, we haven't heard what he's going to do with this second one.
Okay. The statutes in Florida say the maximum is $50 million.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that a court could require, well, in Florida, the rule says the court can require or deny the ability to do this, but it's up to the losing party to stop the collection procedure.
Right.
Like going in and levying on an apartment that belongs to the corporation and selling it, or finding a bank account and garnishing the bank account. I don't know if the man has any money.
Right.
But you do have to do that, and I don't see anything in the press that indicates that's being done or has been done. Or is even discussed.
Yeah, my understanding is he has 30 days to initiate the appeal, and wouldn't that be part of the appeal process, also asking the court to freeze all this stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. So
in order to have the clerk accept it and not reject the appeal,
right,
I think he would have to post the bond.
Right. Right.
So perhaps that will happen at that time, or he'll find another MAGA person to help him out with that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that's only a piece of it here, David, because we were expecting this verdict yesterday. Now we hear it's going to come down next week. From the judge in the fraud case, where Trump has already been found guilty of business fraud. He's looking at 5 other charges, and the court has to determine how much he has to pay for each one of these charges. And just the one that he's already been found guilty on, Letitia James is asking for over $300 million. So he's going to be in a world of hurt if he has to pay these things up. That said, Donald Trump has always been successful at postponing, the inevitable until it's just like, he can ignore it. You've got over 3,000 people who've sued him for non-payment of bills, and he just laughs all the way to the bank. And then, on top of that, he may be able to just appeal this thing forever, basically. I'm very skeptical that E. Jean Carroll's ever going to see a penny of Donald Trump's money.
Well, if they don't post if they try to post a bond and they haven't got the money to post the bond, it could come to a head real quick.
Yeah.
When somebody walks in and starts selling his assets.
Yeah. Well, it's going to
be. He has that aren't mortgaged to the hilt.
Yeah, I get it. It's going to be interesting to watch, David. It's a real freak show. It really is. And but and I guess the good news is that more and more the whole Donald Trump thing is being relegated to the category of freak show. So we'll see where it goes. David, thank you for the call. Jim in Monmouth County, New Jersey. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
We're about the same age. Just a little comment on the draft thing from personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very mixed on what I feel about it. I graduated from college back in the middle of the Vietnam War. And if you remember, we had a lottery.
I do.
And my number was 10.
Whoa.
So within a month of graduating from college, I got a draft notice.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going down for a pre-induction physical and in the federal building here in Jersey. And there are about 100 guys in this auditorium, about 8 military doctors. I was the one or two white guys in the group. And I go into this doctor, and maybe it's just the luck of the draw. I see this as maybe a very much a luck of the draw. But the doctor asks me, he said, "You just got out of college, right?" I said, "Yeah." And he tells me he'd been in Vietnam for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "You're an athlete." I was on the track team in college.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me, he said, "Did you have any injuries?" And I said, "About a year ago, I hyperextended my knee, minor injury."
Mm-hmm.
And he closes the chart and he says, "Hey, listen, kid, do you really want to go?" And I thought, well, if I had a choice, I don't think so. And he writes a few things down. He says, "Go home, kid."
Wow.
And,
you got a good one.
And yeah, and all those African American kids, those black and brown kids, they weren't getting that treatment. That was one of my first experiences of white privilege.
Yeah.
And my cautionary tale about the draft is we better be damn sure that it's done with some relative equity.
Yeah, fairness. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's why I would envision a draft where more than half of the people who get drafted don't actually go into the military. They end up working in hospitals or,
I saw that, kind of a national service draft.
Exactly, yeah. Which was, this was, I don't know if Germany is still doing this. I believe they're not. But in 86, 87, when I lived in Germany, I was working with an organization that ran a small hospital, a large medical clinic. And half of the people who worked there were, 18-year-olds who were avoiding the military by, volunteering with a hospital. And they had traveled from all over Germany.
I think that's a good idea,
Yeah, it worked really well, and it really helped nonprofits, too. I mean, Jimmy Carter had a program like that, too, that we made use of. It had nothing to do with the draft, but, where you could I think it was called Service Corps or something in Service to America. I forget the acronym, but we actually had hired a guy through that program for a nonprofit that we had, a Community for Abused Kids up in New Hampshire. So,
but for me, it was very much a formative experience.
Yeah, I can imagine.
My attitude, and I'll tell you, I almost wanted to become a priest after that. I was kind of guilt-ridden. It was survivor guilt, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I totally understand.
And I just had the luck of the draw. I reached, and I'm sure he wasn't asking the black kids this.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were actually lining people up in sixes, and they'd say, "Number 5, step out. You're in the Marines."
Really? Just do it. Wow.
They were so desperate at the time.
Yeah.
That's I just walked home. And
amazing story.
Yeah.
Jim, I need to move along, but thanks for sharing that personal story with us. That's fascinating. I appreciate it. Dave in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Dave, you wanted to talk about the draft too?
Yeah. Just before I get into that, I have a question. Do you still think they allow Trump to see the presidential daily briefings, especially after Mar-a-Lago?
I would be very surprised if Biden is sharing those with him. I mean, the tradition was that any former president can get them if they want them, and some do and some don't, and some just take a weekly summary. If this administration is sharing the PDB with Trump, I would be surprised.
Okay, I'm just curious.
But I don't know.
Like one of your previous callers, I caught the tail end of your talk about the draft that last hour. And you are aware that all of our military, our total numbers are down right about at what it was pre-World War II, if not lower levels.
No, I didn't know that.
You know, they're having trouble with getting them in recruitments.
Is that a problem
of course,
with...
The Marines made their recruitment, but then again, barely made it. A lot of these kids, they're either overweight by their standards and stuff like that. And some don't want to, but, you know, that... And I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, if the heat keeps coming on in Mideast, that they'll be doing the draft again.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, the time to do it is not when you go to war. It's when you're at peace.
Remember
right?
the Mideaster that time, too, when Bush was in there.
Oh, yeah. But, Dave, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
45 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the draft, too. I had a history of asthma after the age of 12, so I didn't have to go for the draft. I agree with the draft, but I don't think that we should have all of the deferments that they had back in the day for the rich people.
Yep, agreed.
And the more people we get involved in the draft, the less likely we are to go to war.
I agree. I mean, look at World War II. You had, you know, Joe Kennedy's oldest son died in World War II. You know, George Herbert Walker Bush was a bomber pilot. George McGovern was a bomber pilot. I mean, people, very wealthy people from, McGovern wasn't one of them, but, I mean, everybody was in, basically. I mean, my mother was almost engaged to be married to a guy who died in World War II before, and then later she met my dad. Everybody was affected by that. And in some ways, I would say it brought the country together.
Yeah, and Trump is bone spurs. And then as far as Trump is concerned, too, you were talking a little while ago with one of the callers about this judgment, for Carol. Mm-hmm. They were saying that her judgment was large enough to be within $1 million to $2 million of one of his buildings. Now, he has to put money up front, and if he's going to turn around and appeal us, she's going to be accruing interest on that, too, from what they were saying.
Absolutely right. And the Trump Tower was appraised about 3 years ago at being worth around $85 million, as I recall. So basically, the judgment she got was Trump Tower.
Yeah.
She should just put a sign out front, newly renamed E. Jean Carroll Tower.
Yeah, right. And thank you for your books, by the way. You've made me feel comfortable in this world. I've gone through a lot of jobs and that kind of stuff. I always felt kind of out of place. And you have kind of made me understand myself a little better.
You're talking about my books on attention deficit disorder?
Yeah.
Cool.
I would learn a job. I've been a millwright, a truck driver, an electrician, a business owner, a business manager, you name it. And I always thought, as soon as I learned the job, I would turn around and get bored with it and then move on.
You're describing my life, Michael.
and also,
welcome to the tribe.
When it came to small talk, I am not much one for small talk.
Yeah, same here.
And give me an important subject, even politics. Yeah, I'm into it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad it was, my writings were useful for you. I started, I wrote that first book, Hunter in a Farmer's World, to my son. I mean, because he had just been given this god-awful diagnosis. You got a brain disease, and you're never going to go, you'll forget about college. I mean, my son's now got a master's degree, and he's running his own business. But it's like, I just wanted people to know that, you can do really, I mean, frankly, I think ADHD is, half asset, half liability. And at least speaking for myself.
Well, I'm going to turn around and have the wife order your book.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good one.
And thank you.
It's a good one. Good talking to you, Michael. Thank you very much for the call. And you'll find, a lot of summaries and things over at hunterinAfarmersworld.com. We've got a whole website devoted to that as well, hunterinAfarmersworld.com. I'll be right back with more of your calls in 60 seconds. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our men to play it, I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 9 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Sorry about that, George. What's up today?
Hey, morning, Tommy. I agree with you. We should bring back the draft because it'll make it a lot more equitable if more people had skin in the game. Tom, in 1970, I was going to be drafted. So I joke, I dodged the draft by enlisting in the U.S. Army. The recruiting sergeant told me, we'll send you out to the Army Language School in Monterey to learn Russian, and then send you over to Germany to serve out the rest of your tour. And he was right on both counts.
Oh, that's great. You had a good time?
The Army taught me two things. I won a sharpshooter's medal in Russian. Thank goodness I didn't ever have to use the former, but the latter got me my job with no such agency for 20-some-odd years, so you learn good skills, and,
That's very cool.
I can't complain.
That's very cool, George. Yeah, it's, there's so many cliches about military service that are just so misinformed. So, yeah, thank you for your vote on the draft. George,
and keep up the good work. I enjoy listening.
I will do it. Thank you, George. Thank you for listening. I really, truly appreciate it. Kenneth in Anaconda, Montana. Hey, Kenneth, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I just got an observation about the draft, and maybe a thought or two. My dad was drafted 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor, made it all the way through the 10th Mountain Division, and came home. And I was drafted in 1969, and I was a medic. And, talking with my dad and whatnot, and having my own experiences in the Army, I would just about have to say that the people that I served with, they certainly weren't up to the same par as the greatest generation was, although there were a lot of good ones. It just didn't seem like they had their heart in the game, you might say.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of thinking that, instead of having an on-demand draft, we could do some type of a compulsory service, after high school or whatever, a couple of years, and then you would be in the system. And then if we did have a national crisis, why, have an age limit of 35 or something like that.
Right.
And if you got called up, why then it should be a privilege to serve and do your patriotic duty.
Yeah, it works in Switzerland. It works in Israel. It works in countries all around the world. It worked here. I think it needs to be recalibrated so it has a larger civilian component. And I think that anybody who gives a year of their, after high school, gives that first year after high school to their country, in exchange for that, they should get free college or trade school or some sort of, and for those who don't want to go to college or trade school, some sort of compensation, some sort of, that launches them into a career for the rest of their lives and gives them, opportunity. I'm with you. Kenneth, thank you for that call. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, this is a comparison about high schools today and when I went to high school years ago. Mm-hmm. I had a year of civics, a year of biology, a year of chemistry, 2 years of Latin, 2 years of French, 1 year of the works of William Shakespeare, and everything else that you can think of. And I bet they aren't doing that today.
I don't know. It's been a lot of years since my kids were in high school.
Yeah, I went to a wonderful high school, and it was a public school. We even had a year of Shakespeare.
That's incredible. Yeah.
It is. 2 years of Latin, 2 years of French.
Yeah, I had 2 years of Latin,
chemistry.
and I had 2 years of Spanish and biology and chemistry and all that stuff, the math. Yeah, I don't know, Carol, but what I do know is that these states that are doing universal vouchers are now saying, oh, you can take the voucher and you can use it on an online school, you can use it at homeschooling, you can use it, this, that, and the other thing. We need to rebuild our public school system. I mean, it's just that simple. We really need to do it.
Absolutely. We really do. We need that very much because I think we would have fewer Trump voters if we had good high schools.
Well,
if we had good schools.
Yeah, and good curriculum. I mean, Reagan cut when his first year in office, he cut the federal education budget by, I think, 18 or 19%. And then, there were subsequent cuts after that. And of course, he ended free college in California when he was governor of California, and is now trying to, and then basically helped end free college all across America. It's a mess. Carol, thank you. Thank you for the call. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. Otherwise, it's not democracy. So get out there, get active, get ready, right? In the red states, the Republican secretaries of state are already purged. They've already purged several million people from the voting rolls. So if you live in a blue city in a red state, double check your voter registration because they are coming for us. Anyhow, get out there, get active, tag you're it. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, and stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!